Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Thursday. Hope everyone is having a great week so far. You'll notice as you join the webinar, you'll be on mute and your video access won't be turned off. If you can please keep it that way to avoid any background noise and distractions. Just quick introduction. So I'm Matt Wood, Managing Consultant here at Fruition IT. For those of you who don't know Fruition IT, we're a specialist IT, digital and change recruitment business in Leeds. Welcome to our live webinar, which is part of our lockdown learning series that we've been hosting now over the past 16 weeks. I'm very pleased to introduce James Scanlan, who's Technical Delivery Manager at Channel 4, who will be talking about our DevOps journey over the past 10 years and what our journey in the future will be. We'll keep questions until the end, but any questions, you put them in the chat box and James will do his best to answer those at the end of the session. So James, over to you.
Hi everyone. Right, I'll just jump to screen share and I'll do that usual thing where can everyone hear me, can everyone see what I'm trying to present to you. So just double check, can you see my exciting slide deck? Is that working, Matt? Cool. Right, thank you. Right, I'll crack on. So yeah, so we Matt and I had a chat about potentially doing a talk here, and thanks for the opportunity. And we decided to go for 10 years of DevOps, what now? And so I'll talk through in time what I'm going to try and cover and hopefully find engaging. There's a bit of a story, so it might be you might have a question that comes up, and hopefully I answer it. But yeah, let's have a good chat at the end about what DevOps means to us, both of where it's taken us so far and what might happen next. So a little bit about me. There we go. So yeah, so hi, I'm James Scanlan, Tech Delivery Manager. I'm in the tech delivery space for Channel 4 Television, specifically the All4 video streaming platform. It's quite an interesting problem space. Without boring you too endlessly about it, we've got multiple clients, but be it Apple, be it Android, be it all the very TVs you'll have on your and smart TVs that you'll have on your living rooms, set-top boxes, those sticks like Amazon Fire Sticks and the like, and Now TV that you can plug into your devices. So that's quite a complex set of different platforms that we have to try and cater for, and then that's backing off to a macro, micro, monolith kind of like a state in which we are, serving a lot of data to be responsive to individuals and the platforms, and then streaming at scale video content to people. So yeah, so that in itself would be enough of an interesting problem space without us then adding on delivery, operational, and corporate overlays over the top of that. And so yeah, so that's keeping me very, very much quiet at the moment. So why am I doing this talk today? Well, I think as I mentioned in the bio, imposter syndrome strikes quite hard at the beginning. There are lots more subject matter experts in DevOps than me, surely. That may be well the case, but I'm happy to share my experiences, and as long as you understand that's where I'm coming from. I'm also a really big believer in communities of practice, and I feel that all of us should engage and participate and carry forward that debate. So that's a strong reason why I'm talking to you today. I've been knocking around the IT industry for 20 odd years. I'm that's first of the confessions. I'm a dev by background. I guess it's all the fault of when my mother, who was a teacher, brought home a Commodore PET back in the early 80s, home for one summer holiday, and I started writing an adventure game, and it's been downhill ever since. I've had job titles in that time of developer, architect, manager. They've all been associated somewhere in them. And I even tried experimenting with servant leader until my team started throwing rocks at me. And without going too trite early doors, in my own small way, I'm just trying to make things better, despite all those rocks and all the evidence to the contrary. And so continuing on with my confessions, on imposter syndrome and the like, I'm also going to have to say at the early doors that I'm a bit of a thief. And what I mean by that is I'm not a subject matter expertise. I'm a seasoned veteran, and I've got scars to show it, but there are lots of experts in this field. And so what I'm really doing in this talk is I'm presenting some of their key messages. And so just know that there's less of my original material, thank God, and it's more distilling of what they're saying. My son is currently at university, and he's always been quite careful at citing his references, and I will try to do so likewise as I go through this talk. And yeah, it's not just me regurgitating, it's just a distillation. And this is a quote that happened a few weeks ago when I was talking to some people, and it's slightly out of context. And you know that they didn't, you know, you could misinfer what they were saying here, but I was in the early stages of writing this talk, and I seized on it as a nice quote to kind of frame what I want to talk about today, because they're not the first person to, you know, rule in what is and isn't DevOps. And you know, in this very context, I was talking about culture, and so whilst they thought that you know, they wanted to talk about engineering and they wanted to talk about operational stuff, but for me, culture is paramount to DevOps, and it's partly, there's a bit of an ambiguous nature to DevOps that allows us to choose what is and isn't it, and that's partly what I'm going to talk to you about today. So it was just it was an interesting loop for me to start with. So what I'm going to really do for you today is let us walk back, not through tedious regurgitation, but to stay where how DevOps started, and then some of the key messages that have gone through over the years, and then look at where that might take us next. So if we go wind that clock back right down to 2008, without, you know, I mean, I didn't know that. I sort of knew this, but I didn't until I started researching it. So and I'm not gonna murder anyone's names here. So I think we'll get the order round right. So Patrick was the only attender of Andrew's talk on agile infrastructure, and so that attendance kicked off quite a large chat, and they followed up by creating an agile systems administration group. And then later on that year, Patrick then hosted a DevOpsDays conference, and he was looking just in naming really to try and concatenate names and shrink them down. So he took dev from development, ops from operations, and to get that DevOpsDays conference gig. And then it was only when he was trying to create a nice terse hashtag that he created #DevOps, and that's where the name allegedly comes from, if we respond to legend. In the midst of all that, in the middle of that year, you can see that there was a key talk by Flickr, by John Allspur and Paul Hammond, about 10 deploys a day, Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. And I'm just going to revisit that talk, because when I went back through the slides about what they presented back in 2009, and I was kind of like, my socks were blown off really about some of the key messages that they were giving then, and the relevance to what's happened over the last decade and now. And so if we look at, you know, I've literally nicked some of their slides here and brought them together, saw some of the messages. So, you know, the core message there about trying to get ops to think like development and development to think like ops, to not have ops being seen as some sort of like police force, keeping, you know, looking after the live estate, to talk about, you know, reducing the risk of change through a balance of not just tools, but also the culture and how the team would approach it. I mean, mind-blowing really, especially, you know, when I think to myself what the practices I was involved in 2009. And, you know, in terms of these key messages, to, you know, to automate the infrastructure, which, you know, a lot of us weren't there at that point, to have dev and ops sharing version control, so there's a shared commonality about understanding how we're approaching solving problems, to have a, you know, press the elbow on the keyboard and deploy your application on demand, to deploy to live but do it safely, where we feature flag things off, so we didn't have all this branching and chaos, to have a shared set of metrics about the operation and building of our services, so we could have a combined conversation about what good looked like, and to also then, you know, obviously Slack wasn't there then, but to have some sort of social media tool-esque way of engaging and understanding our services, and a lightweight touch, so we could just, you know, have those fast feedback responses to issues. But that wasn't just, you know, tooling and approach. There was also, this was, you know, right from the get-go, they're articulating that none of this is going to really work without a really strong enabling culture, that this was built on trusting the teams to get on, work together and deliver, that we had this really healthy attitude around failure, that it wasn't like a an inquiry every time there was a fault, that we use it as a learning device. We weren't blaming. There was that blame culture was going away, that we were just, as long as we were learning and improving, that was the, fostering the right culture. And and partly this was to pause at that point and just say, wow, they hit the nail on the head right at the start. And we've all been trying to adhere to this and other good practices ever since in the last decade. And they're right. I mean, this is kind of like the closing joke they almost put in their talk. None of this is easy, and it must have taken them a long time to get to that point. And we've all over the last decade been having successes and and failures in this space, and it isn't easy. But let's not just the last thing we want to do is have those silos shouting at each other. So it brings us back to the question, if things are and aren't DevOps. There's conversation on the Agile debate about what is agility, is Scrum Agile, things like that. And I'm not going to open that box of worms. But the question really getting down to, there's been, these central tenets have been open to interpretation. And for me, I think DevOps has been more so. There's a certain ambiguity and conditionality about DevOps that allowed people to say this is DevOps for us, which is fine, but there are some central tenets and principles that we should adhere to. And I thought, without teaching grandmother to suck eggs and go right back to the start, I thought I'd just reiterate some of those core messages, just so that what the core message, what people were trying to say DevOps is. Hello. There we go. And so so this is the infinity loop that we'll all have stickers on our laptops and done presentations to each other endlessly over the last few years. But it's again, it was a great design and message to convey what DevOps is, to have that small batch release of changes going, that we were automating and getting fast feedback to go right through the cycle, from build to testing it to releasing it, deploying it, understanding how it was operating in live service, to getting those feedback, to then use that to feedback back into that cycle, to then go back round and round the cycle, and to engage and get those teams. And then again, to reiterate what the likes of Jez Humble and co, more on him later, have said very much better than I would ever do, to have high trust as a cultural norm, to have architectures that lend themselves to testability and deployability, which, if we go back and wind the clock back and look at where we came from, that wasn't necessarily where we were taking our systems. And to look at, technical practices such as continuous integration, continuous delivery, automated deployment, proactive production monitoring. I mean, in retrospect, the stuff that we now have, baked into our systems, it feels painfully obvious, but we've had to build these things in. When we go wind the clock back, we didn't necessarily have all of these features, and it was, we had a lot of pain. I'm sure those of us who've been around the block enough times have had all those experiences where we did 6 monthly releases that were painful, and risk rollback and the pain of rolling back, and all sorts of war stories that we just don't want to go back to. I mean, for me, the core message about DevOps, amongst many others, are to have that commonality of ownership, to break down barriers and silos, and to expand that problem space so we understand it fully, rather than have it in from a siloed perspective. To find those opportunities of joint working and to improve, to improve our practices, to improve our roles and our day-to-day jobs. And so I mentioned that there are a lot of subject matter experts who've espoused some really good practice over the years, and this is just a thin selection of some key books that you may have read to help you in your DevOps practice. And my big call would, if you haven't read some of these, I definitely recommend them. They kind of go in a logical series. The team topologist one is just a later shout out because it's kind of a new kid on the block. It's not necessarily about DevOps per se. It does cover it, but they're talking about organization design, of which DevOps is one part. But the precursors to that, I mean, I've kind of, you can see if you look at the names, I've kind of gone down one axis of the Dora community, the Jez Humbles, the Nicole Ferguson, the Gene Kim, But there are lots of other voices in the DevOps space, but these and other people have really espoused a good set of good practice that we can all align to and follow. You know, shout out to Accelerate, which for me is a data-driven guy, really sunk home, like they all did from the key messages, but to really you know, understand what value-added metrics help us frame our services, to understand our deployment frequencies, our lead time for changes, our mean time to restore services, our change failure rate. These are like driving metrics that can help us push forward on our services. And I mentioned that DORA community. They were heavily involved, not solely, but they were one of the key voices that many of you probably have read the State of DevOps report that came out each year. And when I was thinking about you know, 10 years of DevOps, I thought, well, actually, this is quite an interesting framing device. You know, this wasn't the only voice in the community, but it was an interesting one. And it's, you know, they did an awful lot of research. They were quite academic in remit. Well, Nicole certainly comes from that space. And there's a trend that we can see in here that I'm going to reinforce some of the messages. So if you indulge me, I'll whistle through the key messages that came out of these reports, and it just kind of illustrates where we've gone in the last 10 years. So for the first 3 years, they were very, very centric on performance. You know, it was basically, if you do DevOps, you get a better throughput, you get fewer failures, you get faster deployments, and, you know, the world is great. And so we can see these core messages, but they started to expand this message as they went through time. But it, you know, the quality, you know, quality in, quality out, and the greater organization performance is like a core message that they keep giving. And so we go from 2013 to 2014. They start to show, you know, this clear line that, you know, the overarching performance of the organization correlates with good DevOps practices. This is where the cultural elements start to come in. So, you know, a high trust culture, again, links in with organization performance as a whole. And a shout out to individuals, you know, so people with good job satisfaction, again, was the #1 correlation to organization performance. So, you know, whilst if you looked at the actual report, all those metrics will still be in there about, you know, the process improves performance, but a lot more on culture started to come through and how we focus on individuals to empower these changes. 2015, you know, I'm not going to read it out in front of you, but again, lots more metrics about the improvement. And, you know, as we go through the years, these numbers get higher and higher, you know, as an acceleration about performance. Accelerate, I wonder what that led to later on in the cycle in terms of bugs. And again, they're starting to talk about how management can facilitate DevOps and a leanness to it. Continuous delivery, really, you know, we can get more value out the door. And this is, I mean, from personal side, this is the first report I read in this cycle, and it, you know, it's my second socks blowing off moment. If that Flickr talk was the first one, then this one was a real enabler, not only on about how it, you know, we could get more value out the door faster by adhering to these processes and starting to break down the barriers in the teams that I was looking after, but diversity was a massive message that came home, that just having diverse teams increased the quality of the software, not about what they did or how they approached it, but just their diversity of the team made things better. And that, you know, that's something, you know, maybe you could argue it should have been there all the time, but, you know, that's something I've carried with me ever since. As we carry on through the years, again, those numbers are getting higher and higher. Interesting point here about, you know, shared responsibility and reinforcing that messages that, you know, quality is everyone's job. It wasn't like, you know, I write the code, I do deployments, but, you know, quality across the board is everyone's responsibility, and having a shared focus for it. And like the reinforcement loops that, you know, the better performers in DevOps spent less time fixing things like security. And this is like, maybe not the first time, but the first time security got a key message. When I was writing this talk, I was thinking about where to go into like DevOps, because then we had lots of ops. We had AI ops, and we had data ops, and also DevSecOps, and that became a growth sector. I don't know if it's the right phrase, as purist, but, you know, I'm a big believer in shifting left, and so I want to envelop security into DevOps. I don't necessarily see the need to call out DevSec as a DevSecOps, but then that's because I come from a dev background, so I'm happy with DevOps as a label. Maybe I was in security, I'd want to get that call out, but you know, I digress. And again, for the rest of these reports, there is a focus on about how they're showing that it's not just about startups. You know, this is a really good model of you're like 10 people in a warehouse cracking away writing a new app. It's, you know, technology transformations of any size produce cost savings. It's not, you know, this pattern of DevOps matches all organizations. So here we go. So 2017, so we're getting here to now. So we're talking a lot more about transformational leadership. Now, again, that's really supportive, especially like the enterprise adoption of DevOps. So to have the right vision, really good, you know, really good communication, to be intellectual rigor and challenge, to be supportive, and to, like, you know, calling out people, and, you know, to cite and the contribution that individuals are making, to make it about the individuals, not the enterprise. So of massive value. Lots of these things, especially in retrospect, feel like no-brainers, but, you know, automating our services gives us more time to innovate and build faster, and those feedback loops speed up. That's why we're seeing those metrics every year go higher and higher. Another message they gave out was that, you know, this might have been a conversation about build, like the dev in DevOps kind of alludes that way, but the model can be expanded if your part of your delivery estate is to procure and buy services. That DevOps good practice can help with that too and improve things. Architecture, and that, you know, loosely coupled is a strong enabler for continuous delivery. We've in this 10x plus cycle, we've had a long running parallel conversation around monoliths, microservices, nanoservices. What is the right composition, containerization, serverless, you know, the whole shebang. But ultimately, we're just trying to find that sweet spot between a bowl of mud and simpler things that we can tear up and down and scale. And, you know, the smaller microservices approach works hand in hand with this to allow us to do continuous delivery. And an early shout out to product management and how a leanness approach to that can help, again, drive performance. So in 2018, I started to wonder where the voices were changing in the people writing this report, because we got this unusual service delivery and operational language coming in, and this was the DORA community. This was them trying to incorporate what they saw as availability, which I'm going to have to read because it's just words really. So they see availability as an ability for technology teams and organizations to make and keep promises and assertions about the software product or service they are operating. And so they just saw it as an expansion beyond DevOps. And so they spent a while in this year talking about DevOps in this SDO model. And the bottom line is it's the same key phrase, you know, best practice enables better organization performance. It's a shout out to cloud adoption and showing that, you know, the best performers were more likely to have leveraged the cloud services and the right cloud services, not just copied and pasted their services from where they were in their existing tin hosting into the cloud, but to transform themselves and get the best out of the cloud. Another shout out to open source, that there's been a long-running conversation around, could enterprises, would they have to buy the software to get the right performance? And this was like a key message about, you know, open source was also an equivalent to, you know, yield better performance. This one's an interesting message. Not all of, you know, sometimes, you know, we'll all be working in a different model where we'll have a hybrid of in-house resource and then where we outsource to commercial partners to help us deliver the totality of our work. And what this is saying is to get that model right, really. If you outsource by function, then the elite performers don't do this because it hurts their performance. And so there's an interesting conversation about where you draw those lines. And you can see commercially, if we get the framing wrong, it might impede the ability for each of those suppliers to work in concert together to deliver common value. And so it's just something to keep in the back of our minds. And Again, a key message about industry. This isn't just about startups or like people who are doing websites or apps. This DevOps applies to every sector. So it might be that you're in an unregulated space where you're free to make decisions, or you might be in highly regulation areas like financial services, but there's DevOps can work for you in regardless of the setting. And 2019's report, I mean, the cynic in me, and he's quite strong, would say that there's a strong link to Splunk sponsoring this one, and they've got a drive to selling their security components, but there's a massive security message coming out of this one, and it's conversations we've been having outside of this across the board anyway, about that shift left to embed and integrate security practices earlier into the cycle. Again, in retrospect, it's a no-brainer, but you know, we've all had to go on this journey where we've adopted more and more practice and shift them left into our cycles. And that, in a whistle-stop tour, or hopefully it was a whistle-stop, takes us to the present day of 2020, which has been a bit different. I'm talking to you by Zoom, whereas in a different reality, we'd be in a room probably after work, having a beer, seeing each other in person. And we can't pretend that 2020 has had a different challenge for us all. We know we've had the whole shebang of a global pandemic, civil unrest, and lots of other things affecting our services. And so there is no sign of the survey even, or the DevOps report so far. I had a quick Google last night to double check, but it's inevitable that it will have to address the cats and dogs living together nature that this year's challenged us with. And so it's going to have to include flexible working, remote working, that remote team setting, and how that can be an enabler to delivery. I think a lot of organizations have gone through a transformation about, you know, thinking that remote working wasn't for them, and actually how they can really crack on and deliver value in this setting. And now we're more in that reflective stage about what it means for us in the future. And also, you know, it's had a massive financial impact on the services and what we're doing. And so to be able to change elastically and really refactor down to what our core services that we need to deliver are, also really, really important. Speaking for Channel 4 for a minute, it's been quite an undertaking. You know, as our TV product set, we've seen a massive spike in viewing. It's almost as if people have been trapped at home with little else to do. But it's more than that. You know, we've seen a big appetite for news, especially in sectors of people who might not naturally engage, like the younger people. And whilst it all seems to be settling down now as the lockdown stages, you know, the rules around lockdown are altering week on week, but we're still seeing a massive interest in our archive content as people have found us as a source of succor, or, you know, just a distraction against some of the pressures that we face day to day. And beyond, you know, our offices all being physically shut and all of what that, you know, the remote working setting, it's been very much business as usual for us. And whilst we've had the odd technical niggle along the way, one thing that's really impressed me about the All4 product is how it's coped with the massive spike in scale, and it's been almost seamless, really. I mean, I know there's some of you might have been watching it and experienced an error, and we know that they are still out there, but, you know, overarchingly, it's been an amazingly scaled delivery for us. So yeah, 2020, the new norm is online meetings, you know, death by Zoom, and that extends to the communities like us today, meeting by these remote settings. And I can't pretend that, you know, I really like a physical meetup, but this remote settings has also allowed us to open things up. And so, you know, it's allowed communities of interest to be just that, to be of interest and not be tethered by geography. So it's had many positives too. So what next for DevOps? This feels like a standard interview question that we'd be asking a candidate to see where they're thinking. But there's also some truth in all this. You know, we've seen today how artificial intelligence can help support our services. We can see in like anomaly detection in our monitoring. We can see in like code quality reviews, and then testing how machine learning is already empowering how we do work. I can only see that extending further, greater adoption of all that, especially in now the full management and monitoring and deployment of our services, and on a longer journey, actually how ML will start enabling us to write code. We'll have machines writing a lot of the boilerplate code first, and then the more richer functionality, and the role of the developers and engineers will change in response to that and be more nuanced in how we approach writing systems. It's been, in that cloud adoption of serverless, we can see, functions as service already taking hold, but the direction of travel will only see a much more widespread adoption of this. And there's if we do these things right, then there's a massive architectural advantage here that we'll see an emerging, functional, scalable microservices estate that's a real game changer for us. And yet another adopter for DevOps. I mean, the object-oriented world of programming might be on the wane in part, but that S in the solid principles holds massively true here. So single responsibility is a key architectural principle that will enable us to do things faster in this functional space. I've mentioned it a few times already, but we're going to continue to shift left. We're going to take in more practices that where later stages to our cycles are outside of how we delivered. We'll just integrate with them and see value in doing so. There's an argument over the last 10 years, apart from that automation to deploy and operate and manage our services, that there's been a lot of automation that's covered, well, not the quick wins, but like the functional aspects of our systems. All the testing, has been on the functional side. And what we can see now and also in the future is how we'll broaden that into what we can clunkily call the non-functionals, but all like the performance testing to work, to see how things work at scale and unexpectedly as performance outages occur, or like chaos monkeying, etc. And security-wide too, again, it feels like a no-brainer. Why not embed and have security tests running alongside our unit tests and our functional tests on every time we do a build? And so that will only continue. And enterprise bimodality is a bit of a clunky bit of language. And yes, I did have access to Gartner for a long time. But this is kind of really showing that, organizations need to, they need to keep their revenue streams online. They need to grow, but they need to experiment too. And one approach to that is to have a kind of split themselves in to have two sectors. One is keeping the day-to-day going, and then another side that's more explorational to try and see what the tomorrow's working model might be like. And that's not the only model in town. That might not work for every sector, but it's really basically saying that we can't stand still. We need some means of exploring and working out how we're going to what tomorrow's organization might be like, and then just have those fast feedback loops to get good practice spreading into the day-to-day and evolve that forward. Okay, so a pause for breath, and that's a 10 years and what might be next, which is a bit of a stock answer. But I suddenly thought, well, actually, okay, I know what year it is because I said 2 slides ago it's 2020, and I can see it on my watch and the calendar, blah, blah, blah. But we've all been to talks where we've seen some amazing demonstrations of DevOps practices. I can think back to last year at Leeds DevOps, where Auto Trader came and showed how they'd gone through a digital transformation. And it was, for the third time this talk, my socks were blown off my feet again. Just absolutely amazing. And if you haven't had the chance to see what they've done, I'd hardly recommend it. It's very invigorating. And it's a reinforcement of all those messages about why it's worth the investment to keep pushing for a greater DevOps integration into your company. But I can't help but also look at my own estate and wonder, actually, is all of this good, all this bad? Where are we in comparison to that? And I guess it's a pragmatic reconciliation that just because company X can't deploy 10,000 times a day via Slack doesn't mean that they should necessarily see themselves in the slow lane and having missed the bait, or whatever analogy we want to choose. If they've got an appetite to improve, to deliver more operationally and be stable, then they should crack on and move things on from wherever they are, and they shouldn't see that they've just missed the boat. Just because we're 10 years into this now, it's never too late to engage. And likewise, if your digital transformation was 5 years ago and now all of this is BAU, then you're at the risk of stagnating. I went to a talk recently by Amazon, and that they quote some of the ethos espoused by Jeff Bezos, where they like to live in the state of day one. And the reason for that, because day two is the, which they never get to, is where they see stasis, decline, and death. And so, yes, that vibrancy of embracing change and always being on the front foot is something that we should all do. So we shouldn't see DevOps as being in our past. It's always going to be in our presence. So, yeah, so as we continue, maybe it's time for yet another confession from me. And so earlier this year, I had a conversation with an operations engineer, and he approached me and basically libeled all developers in our company and said they were untrustworthy, and he was near single-handedly protecting the live estate from them. And this felt very much like a trope from yesteryear, that you know, all devs are cowboys and ops are policing live, upholding their law. And it feels, you know, an old trope, and also something that, you know, is completely, you know, we compare that to one of those messages at Velocity 09 conference, that ops weren't there to keep that site stable and fast. So then, you know, why was this opinion being expressed to me in 2020? And how revealing was that statement? Can we infer a lot from that statement as to how the composition and makeup of the company? You know, does it suggest in one dimension that this is showing that we've got a mix of dev and ops and DevOps all working in the same time? And is that good or bad practice? And unfortunately, as with many things, the answer is, well, maybe, but it depends. I think if we start to look at organization modeling, then, you know, you can imagine the DevOps teams as Venn diagrams, and then we might infer that the only model of DevOps is to have the two circles overlaid on top of each other, and that is what DevOps relates to. You know, or that's what it equates to. That, you know, there is one team and it's called DevOps, and that is how things should be. But the world's more complicated than that. And so again, another call out to another set of guys. So Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais have articulated a number of patterns, and I'd recommend you visit them, that show both anti-patterns and positive ways that you can configure your services to deliver DevOps, recognizing different factors that are going on in the industry. And so it's just, again, to reinforce that message that the end state for DevOps might not be those two circles of Dev and Ops overlaid on top of each other, that it might be something different. And so I won't go through it in depth. I'll just say, you know, shout out to the website and have a look. And one example of this is the Google Site Reliability Engineer model for a large chunk of Google's estate. And so this is quite interesting. This shows the complexity of it here. So strategically, Google have decided to keep ops and dev apart, but they still want to do DevOps. And so one of their answers to this would be to create the Site Reliability Engineer role and the team that makes up of that, and to sit as a bridging point between the output of development and the operational management estate that looks after their live services. And they would work heavily with all teams and ensure that the product coming out of development was capable of being managed and run as a live service. And it's just to really illustrate that model. You know, this is far from that simple world of overlaying the two Dev and Ops circles together to equal DevOps. And, you know, this works for Google. It works for the part of Google that has this SRE model, but there are lots of models in there. And I'd recommend that you look at the website, that, you know, the topologist website, to give you a bit of steer about understanding what might work in your context. And as I come to a close, I just thought I'd share with you, you know, experience I had last summer. I was in Athens for a spell, and I was walking through back streets, and I came across a shop with this quote written on a window in front of a very strange machine that could have been a time machine, could have been a coffee machine. But it was basically what Phil on the Byzantium was thinking about just almost 2,500 years ago, about engineering. And I thought this touched on engineering, agility, and DevOps in a way, in that So the message I'm trying to convey here is, as a species, we've been chewing over these ideas for a long time now, way beyond the 10 years that we're talking about in terms of DevOps. So whilst, to extend that Greek metaphor, we shouldn't sit on our laurels, we shouldn't necessarily beat ourselves up if we're still trying to complete our journey. So to close, these are my own personal bon mots about what we should do in the future for DevOps. It's to know where you are and to know the sector you're in, what works, what doesn't work, what the enablers are, what might impede you in doing certain things, and to know things exactly, to have the right metrics, add value to, as you introduce change, to inform and give you those feedback loops so you can work safely. That change should be in your DNA, that you should be making changes all the time, looking at those feedback loops, learning and keep changing. That we've got to be culture centric, people at the heart of everything we do. For those who attend Leeds DevOps, you might have heard me talk a lot about culture last year. Without the right culture, we're never going to achieve the approaches and practice improvements that we want. We've got to foster that right culture, and to ignore it is to risk just not getting and delivering what we want. And the future is an anomaly to us. We shouldn't worry necessarily about the jetpacks. We should fix tomorrow's problems today and keep iterating around on that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have roadmaps and we shouldn't have visions of what the future might be for us. We should just know that we might not get there or want to, and we should just focus on delivering tomorrow. And to repeat, but the continuous learning is everything, and it's something we all have to be engaged in to improve our practice and processes. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you for your time. Hopefully you haven't all fallen asleep. We can just hear Zed when we open up the microphones. And hopefully that's of been some value to you, stimulated some debate, and we can have a little chat if people have got some questions.
If anyone has any questions, can you pop them in the chat box, please?
Hey James, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm on my phone. It's a bit awkward to type at the minute. It's Julian Oxley speaking. I think we worked together once before.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah. Was it Asda maybe?
No, maybe NHS.
Yeah, there you go. So I was wondering, could you pull up that slide for the Google Site Reliance Engineer thing again?
Yep.
Because I wonder in here, is there a mix of, because SRE implies that there is a person that is the engineer, whereas the others are capabilities. And I just wondered if there's a mix of, because I think there's a common misconception about what DevOps is, whether or not it's a thing that permeates teams as a methodology or as a thought process, as opposed to an explicit definition of how a team is viewed. I don't know if I've expressed that very well, but
yes. I mean, stop me in my tracks if I've kind of misinferred, but I've definitely been party to conversations around what is a developer, what is an operations person, and what is an engineer. And an engineer was a kind of a special person who thought both about development and operations. And I felt that was a bit silo-y. I wanted to start calling everyone engineer by default, because it's that shared responsibility and mindset I was trying to engender. So I know this isn't really about the SRE model per se, but yeah, I guess I was more leaning towards that simpler model where we just tried to bring the teams together and start to call everyone the same, because I think the more we differentiate with people, and the more we start to erect barriers, and we don't necessarily want them. But I think I'm slightly strayed from what your core point.
Maybe. I mean, if I rewind to when the MP Fit program kicked off, can remember joining a team, and we were responsible for an internal tool set. And we did everything from requirements gathering to development, and it was COTS customization and a little bit of from the ground up. But then we also ran the support, so we were full life cycle, if you like, and we owned everything about those tools. And then DevOps happened, or the term happened 5 years later, but it was a reflection, I suppose, of what we were doing anyway. And I think it's about that ownership mentality across the life cycle, as opposed to it being you're in ops, you're in DevOps, you're an SRE, and you're a dev. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so we can get lost in labels, but ultimately that shared responsibility is the overarching goal, isn't it? We want to improve the quality of our services by not just seeing it as have we met the customer requirement and shipped the latest build out, that the build passed its test and we shipped it over the fence. But actually we're thinking about, have we how is it working in live? Does it scale well? And is it stable? And just think beyond the standard dev questions, and think beyond the standard operational questions.
Are you still there? You seem to have disappeared.
Oh, sorry. Well, physically I've disappeared, but I'm sorry. You see, that's the curse. That's the curse of home working. That was just that was the Amazon delivery.
So, I guess final question, and then I'll give someone else the floor. But do you see a contention between in this model new features and, let's call it, run and maintain? So I see organisations where the balance is tipped towards new features, and it's sort of, yes, okay, but you're building on shifting sands. You really need to balance off how much time and effort you put into making your services reliable, performant, available, etc., versus making differentiations or features for customers. Do you find that same contention?
Yeah, I mean, welcome to my life. Yeah, so I kind of straddle the build and service estate for the all4 product, and so I spend all of my life advocating to do more technical improvement work for all4, whereas there's a understandable voice from our product family who are looking to add new features to it to get more viewers, get better experience for them. And it's a talk in itself, to find the right balance between the BAU and building new features it's been the last 20 years, and I don't think and to be honest, I don't know if I found the answer, because I think the technical people struggle to articulate the problem space in the same way as product people, and it's hard to get the conversation on the same grounds. And I've tried every model under the book to try and reserve capacity, trying to have a common language. It's a ongoing problem space for me.
Yes, it certainly is difficult to surface the degree of effort required to maintain steady state versus, I want this new whiz-bang feature. Yeah, it's certainly something that I've seen as well. Great. Well, thank you very much.
No problem.
James, can you see the question from Abdul?
I'm no, in short. I think I might have been missing a window somewhere.
No worries. So, coming from Abdul, so I think the most important thing about DevOps is culture and learning. How do you get a team to recognise those as valuable?
I think learning in tech is a no-brainer. Most, regardless of where they come from, that continual learning is kind of hard-coded, if you use the pun, into the people we work with. The culture for me, has been the bigger impediment. I remember years and years and years ago bringing together a team of developers and a team of DBAs who also did website deployments for reasons, and to start talking about how we could work together. And that wasn't about they got on like a house on fire. They go for beers. The the technology, everyone's kind of supportive, but actually to how to work together and how to break down those barriers between, you know, the dev and ops estate was prickly, and it took a long time because it is a massive cultural change. You know, that there is in our heritage that cowboy cops type analogy. It wasn't just something I dreamt up on the fly. It's something that you can see. I hope people do recognise that there is that. You know, there's a common message that the ops people see themselves as, you know, protectors, and we've got to get past that. And that, I'm not saying this isn't an anti-ops cultural thing. I think both sides have to change. I was much frustrated with a developer who's not thinking about something that functionally works in code but is memory inefficient or didn't scale well as anything else. And yeah, so the cultural, you know, I was happy in technology in my career history, and I was less happy with people and all that touchy-feely stuff. And so, you know, physician heal thyself, I spent a lot of my time thinking about people, and I'm still a work in progress. But yeah, the cultural, you know, I realized, or maybe it was pointed out to me, that to not address culture would be the biggest impediment to me getting what I wanted, which was DevOps. And so, yeah, that's what I've been trying to, you know, culture is everything to me.
Yeah, there's a follow-on question here from Ken Hampton talking about, you know, what do you see as the key cultural capabilities required?
The key capabilities?
Yeah. From a cultural perspective.
Oh, from culture. So I'm a big vision merchant, so I think I like to have like a, you know, was it Kennedy who said we'll go to the moon, and then within like 8-9 years they got there, you know, so to have that kind of statement about an intent that we want to try and get to, I think you can then start to say what things are and aren't, but it's basically about, it's that trust, you know, that psychological safety that you want to build in teams, to not simply have every time there's an incident, that there's a staff chamber and there's an inquiry and there's like you feel that you've done something wrong, that actually you pivot that and you've got that supportive and adaptive management who are actually trying to help you and understand why that's happened and how we can prevent it happening in the future, and it's all about reinforcement of being very consistent and showing adaptability, adapt to change, adapt that you don't know all the answers, that you want to work together, that you want to empower the teams to find out the right answers for them. It's a whole suite of things, but it's just sit and spend time with the people, understand what their needs are, what, you know, not just, you know, it's that anti-agility thing about imposing. It's really like, you know, giving the team some guide rails and then just letting them get on with it.
Perfect. Cheers for that, James. Then a question here from Greg at the University of Leeds. His question is, what do you think the future of DevOps is and its prominence in reflecting the future of digital delivery and the interlock with human change?
So I think it's an enabler, you know, in that we've invested an awful lot of effort to automate and understand our services. And so that in turn frees us up. So rather than doing the mundane, laborious task, we're improving the quality of our day-to-day job. And it's also allowing us to ask questions about the quality of what we're doing and how we can improve it. And so that, I think, you know, that's one of the tenets that, you know, we can give ourselves space to do a better job and a better role and to have a better reward loop. I don't mean in terms of finances, but in terms of satisfaction in the role we're doing. And I think that, you know, the happy, as in one of those slides I alluded to, in half of the decade when we were going through year by year, you know, job satisfaction was seen as a key indicator of good organization performance. And so, you know, these all feel like no-brainers, but good practice was again a correlation into good practice, and that's where we are today, and hopefully, you know, only accelerate that in the future.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that, James. Some great comments here on the presentation, so thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I don't think we've got any more questions now. So I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. Unless you've got any last comments to interject with, James.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just seeing if I can spot anything. Okay, so let's do one of the other elephants in the room. So Greek Sharman has just talked about some of the other frameworks there, like ITIL and SAFe. So what do we think the future is in all of those? Well, it's kind of sort of in the same sort of space, isn't it? Yeah, we have to coexist with a lot of other good practice and just, have those conversations about what is adding value. I think in all the frameworks, there's a level of adaptability. And so, find out what works best for you and adapt and change, and don't be locked into a model just because it's presented to you in a training course or a book. And I'll stop prattling on now, if that's all right.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, James. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentation. It's been fantastic. And everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll see you very soon for our next webinar, which will be announced very soon. So please look out for that, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.
James. Thank you.
All the best.